Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and welcome to my channel Colonnati. Today I'm going to finally talk about The Difference Engine by William Gibson and Bruce Sterling. This is like a proto-steampunk novel published in 1990, and I was initially very excited to read it when I realized that it was steampunk and it featured really famous characters from history like Ada Lovelace. I really like Ada Lovelace. And it was really interesting. I was quite into the experience of this book until the halfway point, and then I just couldn't help but notice a couple of things that I hated, like really don't like at all. So it's probably going to sound like I think this book is terrible. I don't actually think it's terrible. I think it is a very particular thing that pushes all of my buttons in an unpleasant way, but I do think it's a novel of interest to plenty of other people, and I don't think it's a bad book. So what is it about? Basically, this is an alternate history Victorian era story where Charles Babbage did in fact build his difference engine and ushered in the era of computers and steam power technology 100 years early. And this has a lot of effects on the course of history and politics and all of that stuff. In fact, I think this book is mostly the authors wanting to explore big abstract concepts of history and science and progress, and not much else. Unfortunately, those big abstract concepts are not what I'm really interested in. A lot of it went over my head. It basically is a lot of flash bang and description around a very tenuous MacGuffin plot. A couple of characters come into possession of a mysterious briefcase of computer punch cards. They don't know what the punch cards do, and yet people are pursuing them or trying to kill them over it. That's the plot. And it's very easy to forget that that is the question set up at the beginning of the story because it's not referenced that much through all of these hundreds of pages. So I will start with the thing that I think this book does really well, that I will actually give it major props for, and that is its description, its sense of place. I felt like I was there in the story. I could see it, I could hear it, I could smell it, which is a little bit unpleasant at times. The entire story is set against the backdrop of the Great Stink, which is a real historical event. It's the reason, kind of like the impetus for constructing London's sewer system. So yeah, you can read this book knowing that most of it just smells like sewage and human excrement, and it's very hot. So the way that the authors, I think, had researched the Victorian era and built their alternate history, they describe so many things. It really feels like you're in the story and you can see how history has diverged and how computer and steam technology has started to affect everyday life. That is really interesting. I think it's the best part of the story. However, there are two major things that I did not like about this book. One is a matter of taste, the other is something that I kind of viscerally hated by the end. So, first of all, genre. Calling this a steampunk novel today, I think, is a little bit misleading, especially for people like me, where my experience with the steampunk genre is very recent through novels published in just like the last 10 years. This version of steampunk is really like cyberpunk wrapped up in the Victorian era, and it doesn't really resemble what I think of as the steampunk genre today. I don't like cyberpunk, and what I mostly don't enjoy about cyberpunk is the atmosphere. Every time I read a real cyberpunk novel like Neuromancer by William Gibson, I've kinda just wanted to take a shower afterwards to get rid of the grit and the mysterious weird fluids. Cyberpunk for me has this feeling of grime and criminal behavior and drug use and hallucinatory experiences in virtual reality, and just this kind of oppressive and depressive atmosphere. And that's what this book feels like. I mean, it's just gritty and dirty and not altogether pleasant, and you already know that it smells to high heaven throughout the entire story. And I did not enjoy that. I really, really didn't. The thing about the novel I absolutely hated is the way that women are written in it. I have a real issue with this. Possibly because the major selling point of the story for me is that it contains Ada Lovelace. The description on the back of the book makes it sound like Ada Lovelace or Ada Byron is a major character in the story, and she's not. And the way that she is written is appalling. Every single woman in the story is a whore, a prostitute, or sexually slandered. I'm not exaggerating. They've taken Ada Lovelace, one of the most important and interesting women in the history of science and mathematics, and turned her into this kind of drug-addled, gambling addict has-been who hasn't done anything of interest since she was a teenager, who's past her prime, and apparently is sexually promiscuous and has slept with everybody in the House of Lords. That's Ada Lovelace in this book. She's not a main character. She pops in and out of a couple of scenes where mostly people just talk about how, yeah, she was pretty great at math when she was a teenager, but she's totally messed up now. And oh my god, that was so disappointing. There's no reason why all of the women in the story should be treated that way. The point in the novel where I gave up trying to enjoy it anymore is smack dab in the middle. There is this extended, graphic, like really explicit scene between the main character, Edward Mallory, and a prostitute. And there was no reason for this scene at all. In fact, after I read an older interview with the authors, I became convinced that the only reason this scene exists is because the authors read a bunch of Victorian-era porn and decided they wanted to try their hand at writing their own porn scene. It's awful, it has no place in the story, and if you want to view it as plot progress or character development, literally all it says is that Mallory hasn't had sex in 2 months, and he's totally down for sleeping with prostitutes and indigenous women and just wants to, you know, have sex. And I didn't want to know that about him. So that really just left a terrible taste in my mouth. I couldn't get over how all of the women were treated in this story. They could have been written better. Let's be honest, the majority of women throughout history haven't actually been prostitutes. Women existed in so many different shapes and forms and roles in society, even in the Victorian era, and if the authors had actually done their research into the era and actual women of that time period, then they have no excuse for doing this. Yes, I'm actually kind of angry about it. I think it's the one really, really major flaw in the book. And the fact that you can then take that kind of masculine writing style and apply it to history and science and everything in this, it's a guy's book. It's written by men for men about men. And I think that's the real missed opportunity of this book, is that it explores the ripple effects of the computer age on every aspect of science and history and society except for those parts that affect women and, frankly, the disenfranchised, the marginalized people. There's no progress for women or anybody who isn't a white man, especially a white man who is seen as great in the eyes of history. And that's, oh man, that's such a missed opportunity. And I think that's something that later steampunk has done a much better job with. When I think of steampunk today, I mostly think of novels that really put women front and center and imagine that they have different roles in society and more freedoms, and you know, they can have those action-based adventure stories. So yeah, that's the difference engine. I don't think that this will particularly appeal to steampunk fans of today, but if you enjoy cyberpunk, then I would suggest giving it a chance, because I think cyberpunk fans are more likely to enjoy it than, say, like, Gail Carriger fans. But do know that what you're getting into is not like an adventure story with lots of plot and action. It's mostly a paleontologist running around London during the Great Stink, hoping to give a lecture, and people trying to kill him instead. I think that may have been more of a rant than I had planned. Forgive me. There are probably other things I could dig into with this novel, but I think I will leave it there. And I'm curious to know what other people have to say about this, especially if you really enjoyed the book. I would like to know what really captured your interest and your imagination about this story. I'm obviously the type of person who's going to get really hung up on the issues of women and stuff like that, but I won't deny that there are many other interesting layers to this book. Thank you so much for watching this slightly ranty review video. I'll be back to talk to you again soon, and until then, bye.